My name is Matthew. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Matthew.
It's good to be here with y'all. And thank you, Steve, for, I think, those kind words. We'll see if they were true as we go through the story. I have a home group. It's the primary purpose group of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's this meeting. This has been my home group the whole time I've been here. I've been to a lot of other meetings, but I walked into this meeting for the first time a little over 10 years ago, and I sat in this room. I sat in the back because I was afraid to come up any closer, and I was sitting there about to come out of my skin, shaking so bad. My legs were shaking. I was terrified, and the guy next to me kind of bumped me on the knee when they were giving out chips, and he said, "You might want to go pick up one of them white ones." And I did. And I'd like to say that was the only white chip I got, but it wasn't. But this was the first meeting I ever came to, and I don't remember a lot from those early meetings, but I do remember when I was in this place. I don't remember what people said. I don't remember who was here or anything, but I do remember a couple of things. I remember that you guys didn't seem miserable like I thought you would seem, and you laughed. Somebody would get up here and tell some god-awful story about some terrible thing that they had done in their past, and I'd resemble that remark, and I'd think, how in the world can you get up in front of a room of 80 people and tell them that? And the room would laugh. And when I'd look up at those people, they'd be laughing at themselves too. And I remember distinctly thinking like I wanted that in my life. I wanted to be able to look back at my past actions and be able to laugh at myself. And I could not do that for a long time. But I'm appreciative of this group. I have a sponsor, and I sponsor other men in the program. My sobriety date is December 29th of 2011. And if you're thinking, who gets sober December 29th, right before New Year's, it wasn't my fault. I got locked up. I couldn't help it. So would have liked to wait, I guess. But getting sent up into detox for a couple of days, and it'll kind of forces you to kind of reevaluate your life, I guess. I guess that's all the preliminary stuff. I wasn't born in North Carolina. I was born in Virginia, but I got down here as quick as I could, and I've been here ever since. I've lived in Moore County pretty much ever since, and lived in Aberdeen for a long time, and my family moved to Whispering Pines when I was going into middle school, so I graduated from Union Pines, and so you don't have to sit there and do the math. I'm 32, about to be 33. It's always things people try to sit there and figure out how old somebody is. But I came from a good family. Like, outside looking in, like, there's no reason why a guy like me should have turned out the way that I did. Like, my parents they're still together to this day. They're loving, they're kind, they're caring. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked his tail off. He still works his tail off. Like, they instilled in me good work ethic. They instilled in me good morals. Like, they told me right from wrong, and I didn't listen to a thing that they said. For whatever reason, as far back as I can remember, I remember distinctly thinking that there's something wrong with me. Like, something's different about how I am than other people. Like, other people would seem to smile and laugh and get along, and they seemed to mean it. And there was just always this fear in the back of my mind that I was never going to measure up to what people saw in me. Like, being the oldest, and there wasn't any other grandkids or nieces or nephews. It was really just me for a while, so you can imagine how it turned out the way that I did. But like, people told me things in my family, like, you're smart, you're good looking, you're athletic, you're going to do all these things in life. And in my heart of hearts, I knew that whatever they saw in me was not true. It was only going to be a matter of time before I let them down and screwed it up, and they would take away all the love and the praise and the adoration that I craved so desperately from them. And the reason I felt that is because I thought love was conditional. Like, it was for me. Like, if you made me mad enough, I was going to write you off for the rest of my life. And I could write people off before I even really met them. Within 5 minutes, I have determined whether or not I like somebody or not. And that's it. You can't change my mind anymore. But that's the way I thought about it. And what that caused was growing up with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, it manifested itself in a lot of different ways. I learned to lie early on to try to cope with it and hide it and protect myself from it. And nothing malicious at first. It got malicious later. But, just lying to try to pretend I was somebody else, because I was so afraid that if people could see what I was like on the inside, they'd hate me as much as I hated myself. And so grew up with that fear my whole life, and I don't remember not feeling that way. And the first time I didn't feel that way was in high school. I got introduced to pills, and I hated the way that they made me feel. I absolutely hated them. But for a brief moment when I took those things, I felt normal. It felt like what other people looked like on the outside. And it was short-lived. It was very brief, and the feeling on the other side was miserable. Waking up the next day and my whole body would hurt. It felt like I hadn't drank water in God knows how long, and just being miserable and convincing myself that I'm never going to do that stuff again. I'm not going to take those things anymore, but give it a few days and I kind of forgot that promise and I'll start doing it again. And I did that for a few years and went off to a good school. It depends on your definition of good and your preference on the shade of blue. But when I got up there, like, all the feelings that I had of being less than, of being different than everybody else, I mean, they were 1,000 times worse. I went from a place where I graduated kind of top of my class and played multiple sports and was fairly well known to, that's what everybody was here. Like, went from a big fish in a small pond to, like, tiny little fish in a huge ocean. And I got lost in the sea, lost in the weeds with it. And all of a sudden I realized that any kind of motivation I had in my life to do the right thing, to go to class, to do my work, to do all that stuff, it was all external. Like, I only did that stuff because I wanted the pat on the back and I wanted the attaboy and I wanted people to look at me and think that I was a good person and think that I was a kind person. But when nobody cared anymore and nobody was watching, I immediately stopped doing that stuff. And it didn't take long while I was up there to not leaving my room for long periods of time, staying under the influence for days at a time and losing big chunks of time in that. And through this whole time, I start going to counseling and wellness on campus, and I'm telling them about how anxious I am and how I'm always afraid of failing and all this anxiety I've got all the time. It's probably a good idea. It's probably reasonable to be anxious about failing all the time if you're not going to class, you're not doing your work. It's probably reasonable to be anxious about your health when you're not taking care of yourself. The whole freshman 15, you're supposed to gain 15 pounds when you get up there because they feed you left and right. It ended up being more of like the freshman 25 for most people when they got up there. I lost 25 pounds when I got up there just because I wasn't eating. And probably during that time developed an eating disorder. I'd eat to try to fill this void I felt inside of me and then make myself sick so I wouldn't gain any weight. And my weight fluctuated wildly through all this time. But what I started doing was this manipulative scheme that I came up with. I didn't do it maliciously to start with, but I figured it out after a while. It only takes 2 or 3 times. I'm a quick study. But I figured out when things got too tough, I could go to counseling and wellness and I could tell them how depressed I was and how suicidal I was and how anxious I was and how I needed a break from school, and they would let me sign this paper and I could go home, no harm, no foul. They'll put my semester on hold and I'll come back next semester and try it again. And every single time I'd start a semester, I'd start strong. I start many things and finish few. But I'd start a semester off strong and give it a couple of weeks, and I'm right back to doing what I was doing the previous semester. And I'm just as depressed and anxious and miserable as I was the previous year. And, calling my parents. I'm up in the psych ward at Chapel Hill, calling them, telling them how miserable my life is. And then when they get down there, I'm so embarrassed I don't want to see them. I change the code so they can't even get in to see me. And so my parents are trying to get into the detox. The security's explaining to them that they're not getting in there without the code, and I'm causing a lot of chaos already in my family's life. And there was many times that I would get brought to the ER unconscious, and they would call home and let my parents know that I'm in the ER, and they would ask, "Is he okay? What's going on? Whatever." And they're like, "We can't share the details with you. He's up here and you might want to get up here." And so my parents would have to make over an hour drive wondering what in the world they're going to walk into. Am I dead when they get up there? They don't know. And I put my parents and my family through a lot through those years. And hopefully Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me how to be the son that they deserve to have in their life now. But at that point, I couldn't do it. I did that for the next 3 years, and I turned 21 my junior year. It took me 4 years to get to my junior year, which, if you remember high school, that's not the right number of times to get to your junior year. But I got to my junior year and I turned 21, and me and my roommates were living on South Campus and had our own apartment, a lot of freedom, living by ourselves. And I don't know, I just had this thought in my head that it'd be fun to drink. What do you do on your 21st birthday? There's not much left to do once you turn 21. The next thing you got is 25? You can rent a car. That's not very exciting. There's not a lot of milestones left in life. I guess AARP at some point, but so I was like, you should drink on your 21st birthday. And I did not drink ever. Like, I grew up in a Baptist house. We didn't talk about drinking. People drank. You just didn't ever talk about it. And my father grew up with an alcoholic mother. She was in Alcoholics Anonymous, actually, and struggled a lot through her life with alcoholism. My dad remembers being a kid in AA meetings, and he'd be 3 feet tall, and he'd have to squat down to see through the smoke, he talks about, and from all the cigarettes. But he just didn't want that in his household, I guess. He didn't want alcohol in the house, and that the only thing I knew about alcohol was what I saw in TV and movies. And so when we went to the liquor store to get liquor for my 21st birthday, they turned me loose in that place, and the only thing I recognized in the whole store was Smirnoff vodka, because I was on a James Bond kick at the time, and Pierce Brosnan and James Bond drank Smirnoff vodka because they had some kind of advertising deal. So I thought if it's good enough for James Bond, it's good enough for me. And so we got that bottle, and we went back to my dorm, and we start drinking, and I'm standing against the wall. I'm the wallflower at my own birthday party. I'm watching everybody else have a good time around me, and I'm drinking my drink, and I don't know what I thought I'd feel, but I was disappointed with feeling nothing. And so I went back over to the bottle, and I just drank straight vodka. And I could tell you I felt something then. That stuff burned all the way down. The only thing I could think was don't squirt it at your nose, because it's going to hurt twice as bad coming out that way. And also thinking, like, everybody's looking at me is what I think. Everybody's watching me. Everybody's going to see if I can't handle it. But nobody cares what I'm doing. They're over there in their own world. But I get enough of that vodka in me that I start to feel the effects produced by alcohol. Like, I swallow that stuff, and within 15 minutes, I feel this warmth that radiates from the bottom of my toes to the top of my head. And within 15 minutes of that first big gulp, I did not care about anything else on this earth except for how good I felt. Like, I loved the feeling alcohol gave me. For the first time, the first time in my life, I thought that's what normal people felt like all the time. Like, when I saw people get up and go to work in the morning, they drop their kids off at school, and they could just go about their day with a smile on their face. This must be what they feel, is what I thought. And I remember distinctly thinking that night, like, I want to do this every chance I get, and I'm going to do this every chance I get. And I did for a long time, as long as I could. But I loved it. And the rest of that night, nothing bad happened. Like, the night when I nothing crazy happened. The police weren't called. Nobody was mad at me. I didn't black out. That wouldn't always be my policy when I drank in the future, but it was that night. And I remember laying in bed and staring up at the ceiling, and I felt like a kid, like on Christmas Eve. Like, I could not wait to wake up tomorrow morning and do it again. Like, I loved it. And I woke up the next day, and I went to the liquor store, and I got 2 more bottles of that same Smirnoff. I didn't register that there was a larger bottle right underneath it, so I paid premium for 2 of the smaller bottles. But I got those 2 bottles, and I drank them both by myself, and I was off to the races. I drank every night. From that night until the time that I stopped drinking, I drank every night. I loved it. And started going to parties, having a good time, getting invited places, being able to talk to girls when it was always terrifying to talk to girls. I had had girlfriends up until this point. I could make a good impression at the beginning. I can make really good impressions. And then as soon as I had them trapped, like, I'm going off the deep end. I'm going crazy. And I realized, looking back, I really never had a true relationship during high school and college. Like, I had hostages. Like, I took people around me and held them hostage. And if they threatened to leave, like, they were probably going to be sorry that they tried to leave. And that's just the reality of who I was at that point in my life. And alcohol allowed me to kind of mellow out and just be somewhat of a human being for some amount of time until they just couldn't stand how awful I was when I blacked out. But alcohol provided for me a lot of things that nothing else in this world ever provided. It gave me the relief that I was looking for so long. And for a long time, I guess it worked fine. But what I noticed is every single time I drank, it took more and more alcohol to get that feeling that I wanted. And the feeling felt like it was shorter and shorter lived every time. And, the consequences of overdosing were pretty significant after a while. And, I used to say, I remember the first time I blacked out, but that's kind of not the way blackouts work. But I remember the first time I woke up after a blackout, and just wondering what happened, trying to piece together the night before, but being too embarrassed and ashamed to ask anybody because I didn't want to admit to them what I had done, and praying to God that somebody else had tore the place up, not me. But it was never the case. It was always me. And started passing out, blacking out and waking up places I didn't know how I got there, with people I didn't know, and like the disgusting things that I put myself through, like things that I swore to God I'd never do in my entire life, like I found myself doing them. And I'd wake up some days and I'd have this moment of clarity where I'd see through the delusion, and I'd really see what my life looked like, and it scared me, and it disgusted me, and I wanted to change, and I would make promises, I would pray, I would make promises to girlfriends and friends and my family, my parents, and I meant them with every fiber of my being, that I would hold to them. But I didn't have the ability, and you give it a few more days, and I'm right back to doing it again. And the last time that I drank, I was back up at school after a withdrawal. I'd made it up there a grand total of a week while I was up there. My girlfriend was up there for the first time. That was exciting for her and the police, I guess. But like, she had been away for some amount of time, for about 3 years. We'd been together for about 4 years at the time, and so for 3 of those years, she was home and at a different college, and didn't see what it was really like. It took her a grand total of a week with me up at school to realize that something was seriously wrong. And we hung out every single night for the first 2 weeks we were up there. And I thought she asked me for the night off to study. I ended up making amends to her, which I wouldn't recommend making amends to ex-girlfriends, but I made amends to her at some point. And I made that comment, and she was like, "Oh no, you wanted the night off that night." And like, she remembered it like it was yesterday, I guess. But I asked for the night off, I guess. I went straight to the liquor store. Like, as soon as I got permission that we weren't going to be hanging out together, I went straight to the liquor store. I had upgraded to Aristocrat vodka. That's the right direction, right? Aristocrat. And it's like $7.59 for a handle. My mom to this day swears I was drinking rubbing alcohol. It's not a lot different, but I went straight to the liquor store, got that bottle, and I brought it back, and I drew a line on it and said, I'm only going to drink to here, and I had all these ploys and plans I thought would try to control the amount I would drink. None of them worked. I took that little, like, plastic thing out of the mouth, whatever, I guess it aerates it like wine. It looks like a little restrictor plate. I pulled that thing out, and I put the bottle up to my lips, and that's it. I don't remember anything else. Just straight to blackout. And I woke up in a hospital, handcuffed to a bed. I had restraint marks across my forehead, wrist, chest, and ankles where I had been fighting against the restraints all night, like to the point of like bleeding, like I'd fought against them all night. There was a very not very understanding police officer still there who was waiting for me and explained to me what happened. And he's like, "Listen, dude, you should have been arrested last night, but when we got there, you were so crazy. Like, we were convinced that like you were psychotic. Like, there was no doubt in our mind that you should have been committed. And like, the only reason that you're not committed right now is because you woke up before they got to the courthouse to write the papers up. Like, if you hadn't sobered up when you did, like, you'd be committed for 28 days right now." And I ended up going home. It's hard to come back from that. And the school expelled me. I got some criminal charges. Girlfriend broke up with me. What else happened in the grand scheme of that whole debacle? I'm living at home with my parents. I'm sharing a bunk bed with a 10-year-old brother. I'm working at a grocery store in the deli, slicing deli meat. And like, everything that was important in life to me, I was 22. I just turned 22. They served the warrant on my birthday. I think they did that intentionally. Because the guy, he was like walking away, and he turned back around and he said, "By the way, happy birthday." Thanks. But like, everything that was important in life to a 22-year-old at that point, like, it's gone. Like, it's all gone. And like, I really thought life was over. Like, this is miserable. This is what it's got for me. And next few months, I just kind of existed. I didn't drink. I smoked a lot of weed. And went back to using pills. And at some point during that time, they put me on antabuse. And before I got kicked out, but I don't know if you've ever taken antabuse before. It certainly won't stop you from drinking, but it'll make you wish you had. Whoever created that stuff is an absolute sadist. Like methadone and Suboxone, like kind of gets you, like it takes the edge off a little bit. Antabuse just makes you violently ill if you drink. Like that's cruel. Like somebody had it against alcoholics. I really feel like I drank on it anyway. Like I could not stop. And my poor grandfather hauled me around a mall one time. I got drunk the night before going up to school one day and for back to school shopping, and my mom was so mad at me, she made me go. Like as sick as I was on antabuse, and my poor grandfather had to drag me around to every bathroom in that mall the whole day for me to go and throw up everything I've ever eaten in my entire life. I felt like I was so sick. And I should mention too that my mom, like during all this time, like they really didn't know what to do. They were hoping that, you know, kind of like the book talks about, rouse ourselves from our lethargy and assert our power of will and make a change in our lives. I guess they thought that if they could just get me through the rough times, then I could graduate and get through it. But my mom drove me to school every single day. Like that was the compromise. They would not let me stay on housing because they were so terrified of what I was going to do to myself or somebody else. She drove me to campus every single day back and forth. And like sometimes we had to stop on the side of the road so I could be sick. Like and she did it every day. But I mean, I guess they really just thought that something would change, but it didn't at the time. So after I get kicked out, I'm living at home and working at the grocery store, miserable. And I had this kind of routine where I worked late. I worked late second shifts. I got off like around midnight, around midnight. And I'd leave work and I'd ride around the back roads of Moore County. And it was winter during this time because it was between September and December. And ride around with the windows down and be stoned, be you know, everything that I could be except drunk. And like I loved that time. Like that was the only time I really felt kind of normal during that time, I guess, because nobody could see me. Like nobody was out at that time. And it was a brief moment where in life where I guess I just felt okay with myself because no one was there. And some nights I'd stay out too long and the sun would start to come up in the morning. And like, as good as that feeling was of riding around at night in that cold air and getting high, like the next morning seeing that sun come up and realizing that the rest of the world is going on with their life and I'm not, like that was horrific. Like I'd see people getting ready for work and kissing their wives goodbye, putting kids on the school bus, going and living their lives. And I remember distinctly thinking like, that'll never be me. I'll never be able to do that. This is my life forever. And it kind of just, those moments of clarity kind of shattered this delusion that I had built up that I'm the way I am because of how I was raised, because of my mental illness, because of all these external factors. I had excuses on top of excuses, and none of them were plausible in that moment, I would realize. December of that year, December of 2011, I don't know what happened. It was an IOP over at the hospital, and it was a normal day. I remember I had gone in, I think I met with the doctor, and I'd smoked that morning, and he wasn't too thrilled about that. And I treated it like a joke. I mean, people in there trying to get their lives together, and I don't care. But I was leaving that place. I think I called an ex-girlfriend and tried to get her to meet me somewhere, and I'd like to think I almost had her convinced to do it, but she wised up at the last minute and backed out. And so I went home by myself, and I don't know, something in my mind just kind of just broke that day. I realized I was done. I didn't want to do it anymore. And so my whole family was home. My mom and my brothers and sisters were in the front of the house. My dad was in the back of the house cleaning. I went into my room and I shut the door, and I took every pill that we had in the house. Like I took everything and laid down in bed, and I didn't want to wake up anymore. Like what my life looked like during this time was I'd come to sometime in the afternoon because I didn't have to be up early for work, and as soon as I opened my eyes, like this highlight reel of just all the awful stuff that I had done to the people around me would start, and I could not make it stop. Like it was nonstop. Like all the things I did to my family, all the embarrassing things that I did that had ripped the things out of my life that meant so much to me, like the regret and the shame and the guilt and the remorse that I felt, it wouldn't stop. And the only thing that made it stop ever in my life was drinking. It made those wheels stop turning. But the last time that I drank it, I got no relief. I went straight to blacking out. And I knew that alcohol wasn't going to fix it anymore. And neither were the pills and the drugs. They weren't they weren't doing anything either. They just made me angry. And I didn't want to die, but I really wanted to stop hurting, and I wanted to stop hurting the people around me. And so I laid down in bed, and I had made attempts on my life before, driving cars crazy, slit wrists. I had overdosed before a couple of times, and probably most of those were attention seeking. Like, I just wanted somebody to notice me. I wanted somebody to give me attention, a little bit of that. But there was none of that in this point. I really thought everybody else would be better off without me. And the last thing I thought as I laid there, and I could feel just kind of fading, and this thought popped in my head. I mean, Big Book talks about people hearing these voices pop in their head all the time. Who you say there's no God, all this kind of stuff. And I don't know if I heard a voice. I heard voices, and I was taking medicine for that, but that was another issue. That was pretty terrifying. But I had this thought, this like, it came through clear as a bell that regardless of what religion was right, regardless of who was right spiritually, like, there's nobody that says that bad people get good things and they leave this place. And I knew that I was not a good person. I knew that I treated the people that loved me most in this world horribly. I knew there was nothing good waiting for me, and that scared me to death. I didn't know what I was going to wake up to, and that was my last thought. I woke up, and I was in detox at the hospital. I knew it because I'd been there before. For psychiatric reasons. I was getting my medications adjusted. Had a Vicodin deficiency. But I was standing there, and I was watching TV, and the ball was dropping for New Year's Eve. I mean, that's a poetic message right there. New Year's starting, you're in detox again. Start the year off strong. And I was miserable. Like, I think broken's the only word to describe it. Like, I had no fight left in me at that point. Like, there was nothing left. And I had been to some AA meetings over the summer, and I met Steve, and we had sat down and started working together, and that's when we had that conversation about the weed. I thought it was a little bit draconian, but he never got mad. He never said anything. He just said something along the lines of, we try to be free from all mood-altering substances, or something along those lines, or whatever. And I think I said something smart back, and it was only just the once, it would just happen one time. And he was like, well, is 3 months really worth, all the heartache it's going to cause 5 years from now when you got to own up to it? And that was nice because I got a resentment and didn't have to come back. But so we kind of knew each other. It's not like we didn't know each other up here, but I found out later that I'd been in the ICU for 3 days, in and out, seizures, like a lot of problems. And my parents, I found out later that basically when they got to the hospital, my parents were told that by the doctors that they would do everything they could to stop the seizures, but they weren't sure there wasn't going to be brain damage on the other side of it. So once again, my parents showing up, and look at what a mess I put them in. But I survived. The only memory I have of being in the ICU was this very attractive nurse coming in and explaining to me that she was going to have to insert a catheter. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with my heart. I don't need a catheter. And I didn't realize she meant the other kind. Found out then. That's the only memory I have, is that tube. But while I was up in detox, I went to an AA meeting. We only carried them up there 3 nights a week back then, so I guess it was nice that I was there the night that it happened. But Steve came up there, and we sat around that table, and I had a lot of people talk to me about alcohol before, and alcoholism and addiction. And I waited for the phrase, I know how you feel. Like, as soon as somebody said, I know how you feel, I was done. Shut down. I'm not listening to a word you say anymore. Like, you don't know how I feel. If you knew how I felt, you'd be doing what I'm doing. Like, some doctor, nurse, lawyer, got a wife, kids, 2 cars, house, all that stuff. You don't know how I feel. And so I was waiting for him to say it, and he never said it. He talked about himself. He talked about alcoholism from a different point of view. I thought it was kind of selfish. I wanted to talk about me. But he talked about himself the whole time. And for the first time in my life, I felt another connection to another human being. Like, I felt like somebody else understood what it was like to be me. And I was baffled. I didn't understand how a guy could talk about the things he talked about and not do them anymore. Like, I really thought, I don't know. So I guess 2 miracles happened. 1, I listened to him, and 2, I believed him. Those were pretty rare things in my life at that point. And when he got done talking, I went up to him and I talked to him, and I just told him the truth for the first time. I told another human being the truth about me, I guess. And he made a suggestion that I should probably go back to my room and pray. And I did. I went back to my room and I said a prayer, and I probably said the most honest prayer I've ever said from that day until this. I just said, God, please help me. And if you've ever been locked up somewhere, I know that detox is not quite the same as prison, but being locked up somewhere for me, I couldn't take it. I couldn't stand it. Every moment felt like an eternity. I couldn't sleep. It was miserable to me to be in that place. And that night I laid down and I fell asleep, and it felt like exactly what I needed in that moment to get through that moment. And it felt like the first time in my entire life that I had said a prayer and it was answered in the exact right way. And the difference was that I didn't put blinders on God. I didn't say, do this. I wasn't bartering. Like, if you do this, I'll do this. It was, I'll take whatever. Just anything, any kind of relief, I'll take it. And it was provided. And it put a little bit of a chink in that wall that I'd built up my whole life of thinking that not that I didn't believe in God, but just thinking that God's for other people and not for me. And when I got out of that place, I went back to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I found that guy and I asked him to help me, and he agreed to help me, and he took me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't understand a thing of what we were doing. I like to think I'm an intelligent human being, and I like to know all the steps before I'll agree to step one. But I was so cloudy and so messed up and so foggy from coming off of all the stuff I was coming off of, and it wasn't 100% clear that I didn't have brain damage. But it's still not 100% clear today. But I didn't care about what was going on next. I just focused on what we were doing right now. When we were reading this part of the book, I could focus on that and I could do that. And I wasn't thinking about the rest of the steps down the line. I was just thinking about what we were doing right now. And I don't think that I particularly wanted to stay sober. I really think, if I'm really honest about what my motives were when I got here, was that I would try. I would really try. And one of two things was going to happen. Either it was going to work, I'd stay sober, yippee, or it wouldn't work. And, years later when I started drinking again and people suggested that I go to Alcoholics Anonymous, I wanted to be able to honestly say, no, I tried it and it didn't work. But I didn't want to have that lurking notion in the back of my mind that I didn't really give it my all. I wanted to honestly say that I gave it my all. I guess joke's on me, I got sober. But, it worked out fine in the end. But working through those steps, I had steps 1, 2, and 3 down when I got here. I took them in that hospital room. I understood that I was powerless over alcohol. It had me beat. And I understood that step 2 had to come immediately after that, because if there is no God, I'm doomed. I've got no hope. And I had said that prayer in that detox, and I'd asked for help, and it had showed up in my life. And it didn't mean life got struck perfect right then, because I was still in it. But it got a lot better immediately after that, and I found that I had the strength to get through difficult moments in early sobriety that I didn't think that I had the strength to get through, and I know I didn't. Doing the 4th and the 5th step was not pleasant by any stretch of the imagination. I wrote everything down, and I had some things written in code in the margin, just in case. And like anybody cares. But we went and met. We met in the room that Big Book used to meet downstairs. There's little chairs and little tables in there, and my knees are in my chest. And we're reading this. I'm reading this thing, and I'm got my hands like this, and I'm on this. I'm not looking up. I'm terrified because, this is some of this stuff that was in this inventory. It's some of my earliest memories. Some of the things that I've had my whole life that I swore I'd lie to God's face about it if I had to. I could not face some of these things that I had done, and they weren't horrific. It was just so embarrassing and so disgusting to me that I couldn't face them, and I said them out loud. I said them anyway. And I got done, and I lift my arms up. There was a sweat streak on the table from where I'd just been sitting there, frozen for I don't know how long. I held this poor man hostage. And when I looked up, I guess what I kind of thought I'd see is disgust and shame and criticism, like I was afraid I'd always see all my life, but I didn't see that. I saw understanding, compassion, and I didn't understand it at the time, but after listening to some inventories on my own, I realized the other emotion that he was feeling at that point was boredom. We're sitting there bearing our souls out, and like the sponsor's like just like a newborn baby trying to keep their head up for 2 hours listening to us go on and on. But I saw that he didn't judge me for it. And he said something along the lines of, that stuff doesn't matter anymore. We don't have to talk about it ever again if you don't want to. And the weight was instant. It came off of me instantly. I felt like I could float out of that room, and followed that up immediately with the amends. And I think I did every amends I could do in the early stages wrong, except for show up drunk. I think it was the only bad thing I didn't do. But I did the best I could, and I went in honest. I met with people that probably shouldn't have met with, and like an ex-girlfriend or whatever. And the question was asked to me before I went, like, what's your honest motive? And I was like, well, I still like her. He's like, well, try telling her that. And I told her that, and she told me the truth back, but the air was cleared, that it was, I got over it. And I tried making amends to one of my closest friends up at school, and I had to send them a letter, and they sent me a letter back and said, I'm glad you're doing great, but do not ever contact me ever again. And that was probably the hardest amends I made, because I want to fix things. I want to be hands-on. I want to do something. You don't understand. Let me explain to you how different I am. And learning how to make amends to somebody when they don't want you to do it is, the only way you can do that is to honor their request, leave them alone. And I've done that. But I'm willing to make the amends if they ever show back up in life. And I made amends to my boss. I stole a lot of stuff from him. That was a terrifying amends. I talked to my dad about it, and he was like, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. You're probably going to get fired. But every time I saw this guy, he made me uncomfortable. I couldn't stand to be around him at work. And I was talking to Steve about how awful this guy was, and he's like, well, what does he do? I was like, I don't know, he's just awful. He's like, what, does he yell at you? No, he never yells. Does he say you do a bad job? No, he always says I do a great job. Turns out the guy's the nicest guy in the world. I'm just terrified of him because I stole a bunch of stuff from him, and I'm afraid he's going to find out. But I got a sum of money together, and I went and talked to him, and I tried to make an appointment because you're supposed to be tactful. He said, come on in right now. And I'm like, well, I didn't really want to get fired today, but okay. And I sat down and I gave him the money, and I explained to him that I'd been, an addict and an alcoholic, and for the last 2 years I've been sober in AA, and part of that is making amends. This money's not mine, it's yours, and I need to give it back to you, and what you do with it, it's your decision. And I told him whatever consequence he wanted was fine. I won't fight any consequence. And he shook my hand, and he said that we're good. That's it. And I worked there another 4 years after that, after admitting I was a thief, padding the expense account. And I got a promotion. I was a manager while I was there. And when I left that place, he shook my hand and said, if you ever need a job, you just come talk to me. And Alcoholics Anonymous took a person who was a liability to that store, a liability to him, a thief, and a terrible employee, not only stealing money and supplies, but stealing time, riding the clock, and all that kind of stuff. And they gave me 6 hours to do a job that took me 3. I didn't tell anybody that. But AA showed that they could take somebody like that and turn him into a decent employee, somebody worthwhile, worth having. After a couple of years of complaining about working at a grocery store and how it's whatever, the suggestion was made that maybe I should look into going back to school. And I didn't think that I would get back in. I reapplied, and I got back in, and it scared me to death. I was afraid that I would go back and I still wouldn't be good enough. I was afraid that when I got up there, even sober, it wouldn't be enough. I always had the excuse before, my GPA is terrible because I'm high all the time and I'm drunk all the time. I'm not going to class. What happens when I go back up there and I'm actually going to class and it's still not enough? And it scared me to death, but I went back up there, and one of the requirements of going back up there was I had to meet with a therapist every single week that I got up there, and I go in there and the therapist she's attractive. And I'm like, well, if you want to see a therapist, might as well see an attractive one. That's no problem. And she met with me one time. I come back the next week, and they explained to me that she's gone, quit. She's in another state. I don't know where she's gone, but she's gotten away. I don't think it was my fault. But she's gone. And they're like, don't worry, we got you a new therapist. And I'm like, okay, great. And they're like, it's Dr. Wendell. And that was not good news. Dr. Wendell was the dean of counseling and wellness, and she was the head of the committee that deals with expulsions. So she was paramount in my expulsion, and now she's my personal counselor. And scared me to death. The last time I saw this woman, I had to be escorted out of her office. So that's kind of terms we're on right now. And I go early, meet her every week. I never miss an appointment. I'm early every single week. I'm courteous and I'm kind and I'm respectful to her. As a result of meeting with her for the next year, I ended up making amends to her. And she ended up becoming one of my closest advisors on campus. And when I graduated from there and I wanted to go to grad school wanted me to explain this very small gap in my educational history. And they didn't believe my rendition of things, which I don't know why they wouldn't, because it was pretty bad. It's like, well, how bad was it really if he's telling us this? It must have been way worse. So she wrote my letter of recommendation for graduate school, and I was able to get in with her help. So that was pretty cool. Again, I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous took somebody that was such a liability that she felt she had to remove me from that campus and turn me into somebody that she was willing to recommend to another institution. That's pretty cool. I'll wrap up with a couple of things. And through sobriety, I think some of the biggest things that have been paramount to me staying sober is getting sponsees and trying to help them the best I can. I mean, I did it all wrong the first few times. I'm chasing sponsees to all the halfway houses in the area because they're running around crazy. I'm running around acting crazy. I'm having to make amends to halfway house leaders because I can't sponsor somebody without being involved in their lives. But like learning how to sponsor somebody and letting them have their own experience and stop trying to be so controlling and manipulative like I'm always so controlling and manipulative. And But sponsoring guys has been huge for sobriety, and it seems like never fails. I've got some problem in my life. A sponsee comes up with the exact same problem, then I got to act all spiritual and explain to him how we need to fix this problem as I'm fixing the problem on my own in the background. And a lot of my sponsees, Steve sponsored them too. They'd ask me a question. I'm like, that's a good question. Let me pray on that, and I'd go talk to Steve, ask him what to do. Another critical thing I think with sobriety is learning how to practice those traditions in my everyday life and learning how to apply them in my everyday life, letting people have their own experience, trying to live in my own means instead of demanding from other people so much, sucking the life out of everybody around me like I did for years, sucking the money out of everybody around me for years like I did, and trying to give back more to life than I take away from it like I used to, and trying to find a way to live each day and do the best I can in every single moment and just try to be a good human being. Like, at the end of the day, like, nothing would make me so happy is at the end of the day, if the worst indictment somebody could have against me is that I'm a good man. Like, I would die for that. Like, that's the dream in my life. And I fall short of that sometimes. And I beat myself up over it. But what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous and what I have to continue to practice is learning how to forgive myself for those moments when I fall short, learning how to make amends for those moments when I fall short, and learning from my mistakes and not repeating the behavior anymore. I'm stubborn. It takes me 4, 5, 6 times sometimes before I realize maybe I shouldn't do that anymore because that kind of sucks. But learning that in life, and just wrap it up on this, back to my family, like trying to be the brother and the son that they always have deserved to have, because I've got a great family, and I tormented them for years. Being somebody that they can be proud of, being somebody that's supportive of them, being somebody that they can depend on, and it's an amazing thing to be a part of. And looking back on life, it doesn't feel like I've been here for as long as I have, but at the same token, it feels like forever. Me and my dad were having a conversation one time, and I can't remember what it was. It was, I guess, I was coming up on 6 years or something like that, and I made that comment. It doesn't feel like it's been 6 years. It feels like it was forever ago. Dad said I was going to say it felt like it was yesterday. Like, I forget sometimes that my family dealt with a lot, and the book says it's a debt we can never square in our lifetime, but I'm glad that I get to live the rest of my life making it up to them and fixing that. So I appreciate all y'all being here. Appreciate y'all listening, and I'm going to tap out at that, and it's good to see everybody. Glad y'all are here.